The millionaire fired the cleaning lady after accusing her of theft, but days later, he was paralyzed when he saw her ring. It was the same one he gave to his wife, who disappeared 30 years ago. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Fairchild Estate, its golden rays unable to penetrate the gloom that had settled over the mansion decades ago. The imposing Victorian structure stood like a silent sentinel on the outskirts of Savannah, its weathered facade and towering columns telling stories of bygone splendor and present sorrow. James Fairchild stood at the window of his study, a glass of bourbon cradled in his hand as he gazed out at the sprawling oak trees draped with Spanish moss. At 62, his once handsome face had hardened into a mask of perpetual grief, deep lines etched around his eyes and mouth. His hair, once dark and full, had turned silver at the temples, giving him a distinguished appearance that matched his considerable wealth, but belied the emptiness inside him. "James," came a sharp voice from the doorway. "Ms. Reed called again about the fundraiser. I told her you were indisposed." Lorraine Fairchild, 5 years her brother's senior, moved into the room with practiced grace. Time had been kind to her physically. Her posture remained ramrod straight, her silver hair impeccably styled, but there was a coldness in her pale blue eyes that no amount of practiced smiles could disguise. "I'm not interested in any fundraisers," James replied without turning. "You know that. We have obligations to maintain," Lorraine said firmly. "The Fairchild name still means something in this town." James took a sip of his bourbon. "Does it? I wonder what it means these days." Lorraine's lips pressed into a thin line. "It means respect, prestige, everything your father worked for, and everything you seem determined to squander in your isolation." The unspoken name hung between them like a specter. Josephine, his wife, her disappearance 30 years ago had torn a hole in the fabric of his existence, a wound that had never healed. "It's been 30 years, James," Lorraine said softly, her voice carrying a rehearsed compassion that never quite reached her eyes. "Life goes on. Not for everyone," he replied, finally turning to face her. "Not for Josephine." Lorraine's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "We don't know what happened to her. She could have run away, started a new life somewhere. She was always different." James set his glass down with such force that amber liquid sloshed over the rim. "She would never have left voluntarily. Never. Something happened to her, and I failed to protect her." Lorraine stepped forward, placing a hand on his arm. "You need to let this go, brother. For your own sake." A knock at the door interrupted their tension. Martha Sullivan, the elderly housekeeper who had served the family for over 40 years, stood in the doorway, her lined face carefully neutral. "Excuse me, Mr. Fairchild, Miss Fairchild, there's a young woman here about the housekeeping position." Lorraine turned, clearly irritated by the interruption. "Send her away. We're not hiring today." "Actually," James interjected, "I believe we are. Mrs. Parker left last week, and we still need someone to manage the East Wing." Martha nodded, relief softening her features. "Yes, sir. Shall I show her in?" "To the kitchen," Lorraine cut in. "That's where staff interviews are conducted." As Martha left, James shot his sister a look. "I'm perfectly capable of making hiring decisions." "Of course you are," Lorraine placated. "I simply thought you wouldn't want to be bothered with such mundane matters." In the sprawling kitchen of Fairchild Estate, Abigail Foster sat with her hands folded neatly in her lap, trying not to fidget. At 25, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that belied her humble circumstances. Her simple dress was clean, but worn at the edges, and her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun, revealing delicate features and expressive hazel eyes. "Miss Foster, is it?" Martha asked kindly, setting down a cup of tea before her. "Yes, ma'am. Abigail Foster," she replied, her voice soft but clear. "Thank you for seeing me. You have experience as household staff?" Martha inquired, though she could see something in the young woman that went beyond her resume, a certain refinement that couldn't be taught. 3 years at the Reynolds home, and before that, I helped manage the Green Valley Inn, Abigail explained. "I have references from both." As she spoke, Abigail couldn't shake the strange feeling that had come over her the moment she'd stepped onto the grounds, a sense of familiarity, as though she'd been here before, though she knew that was impossible. The Fairchilds moved in circles far removed from her own. The sound of footsteps drew their attention. James Fairchild entered the kitchen, followed closely by Lorraine, whose disapproving gaze immediately fell on Abigail. "Mr. Fairchild," Martha said, rising. "This is Miss Abigail Foster." Abigail stood quickly, smoothing her dress. It's an honor to meet you. Sir, James Fairchild started to extend his hand, then froze, his eyes fixed on Abigail's face with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. For a moment, it seemed as though he'd seen a ghost. I'm sorry, he said after a beat too long. You remind me of someone. Nonsense, Lorraine interjected sharply. Miss Foster, what brings you to seek employment at Fairchild Estate? I need the work, ma'am, Abigail answered honestly, and the Fairchild Estate is known to be one of the finest homes in the region. Well, we do maintain certain standards, Lorraine said, circling Abigail as if inspecting merchandise. Our staff must be beyond reproach, trustworthy, discreet. I assure you, I am both, Abigail said, meeting Lorraine's gaze with unexpected steadiness. James cleared his throat. When could you start? James, Lorraine warned. We haven't even checked her references. Tomorrow, Abigail answered, looking at James rather than Lorraine. I could start tomorrow if that suits you. Something about her directness seemed to please him. Tomorrow, then. Martha will show you your duties in the staff quarters. As James turned to leave, Abigail caught a glimpse of a photograph on the far wall. A beautiful woman with dark hair and a gentle smile, seated at a grand piano. Something about the image tugged at her memory, like a half-forgotten dream. That's Mrs. Fairchild, isn't it? She asked without thinking. The room went still. Martha busied herself with teacups, avoiding eye contact. Yes, James said quietly. My wife, Josephine. She's lovely, Abigail said. She looks like she had a kind heart. James studied her face with renewed intensity. She did. The kindest I've ever known. That will be all, Miss Foster, Lorraine cut in coldly. Martha will expect you at 7 sharp tomorrow morning. As Abigail gathered her things to leave, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just stepped into something much larger than a mere job. The mansion seemed to hold its breath around her, as if the very walls were whispering secrets she couldn't quite hear, and in the darkening hallway, watching her from the shadows, Lorraine Fairchild's eyes narrowed with suspicion, and something that, if Abigail had seen it, might have been recognized as fear. That night, James Fairchild stood before the portrait of Josephine, a different kind of bourbon in his hand, one he saved for the darkest nights when memories became too sharp to bear alone. There was something about her eyes, Joe, he whispered to the painting. Something so familiar it hurts. Behind him, in the doorway, Lorraine watched silently, her knuckles white as she gripped the doorframe. The girl would have to go, and soon, some ghosts were better left buried, and some truths were never meant to be found. For always, my love, James whispered to the portrait, unaware of his sister's presence. I haven't forgotten. I never will. Abigail arrived at Fairchild Estate precisely at 7 the next morning, the early Georgia sun painting the mansion's weathered facade in a deceptively warm glow. Martha greeted her at the service entrance, a ring of keys jangling at her hip. Morning, Miss Foster. Ready for your first day? The elderly housekeeper's eyes crinkled kindly at the corners. Yes, ma'am. Abigail smoothed her simple black dress, the uniform Martha had instructed her to wear. I'm eager to start. Good. Let me show you around before the family wakes. The tour was dizzying. The mansion seemed to unfold endlessly, with wing after wing of rooms that felt both opulent and oppressive. The East Wing, which would be Abigail's primary responsibility, had been closed off for years, Martha explained. It needed a thorough cleaning to be made presentable again. Why has it been closed for so long? Abigail asked as Martha unlocked a set of heavy double doors. Martha's hands stilled on the key. It was Mrs. Fairchild's wing, her private rooms, her music room, after she disappeared. Mr. Fairchild couldn't bear to see it used. And now he thinks it's time. Martha pushed open the doors, releasing the stale air of 30 years of memories. The rooms were like time capsules, elegant furnishings draped in white sheets, a layer of dust softening every edge, but it was the grand piano in the corner of what had been Josephine's private sitting room that drew Abigail like a magnet. It's beautiful, she whispered, approaching the instrument. Without thinking, she lifted the cover from the keys. Oh, I wouldn't, Martha began, but Abigail was already sliding onto the bench. Her fingers hovered over the ivory for a moment, as if they remembered something her mind did not. Then, without conscious thought, her hands descended, and a haunting melody filled the room, sweet and sorrowful, like a lullaby for the lost. Martha froze, her face draining of color. I'm sorry, Abigail said quickly, pulling her hands away. I shouldn't have touched it without permission. Where did you learn that piece? Martha asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Abigail frowned. I don't know. I don't even read music. It just came to me. Martha seemed about to say something more when a voice cut through the room like ice. What is going on here? Lorraine Fairchild stood in the doorway, her tall figure casting a long shadow across the dusty floor. Her eyes moved from Martha to Abigail to the uncovered piano. Miss Foster was just getting acquainted with her duties, ma'am, Martha said quickly. Her duties do not include playing my sister-in-law's piano, Lorraine said coldly. Cover it at once. This room is to be cleaned, not used. Yes, ma'am, Abigail said, standing quickly. I apologize. Lorraine's gaze lingered on her, calculating. See that it doesn't happen again? Some things in this house are not for the staff to touch. After Lorraine left, Abigail turned to Martha. I've upset her. I didn't mean to, Martha sighed. Miss Lorraine is protective of her brother's memories. That was Josephine's song, you see, the one she composed for their anniversary, just before she vanished. A chill ran down Abigail's spine. How could I possibly know it? I don't know. Child, Martha said, her eyes troubled. I truly don't know. Throughout the day, Abigail lost herself in the work of bringing Josephine's rooms back to life. She dusted shelves lined with leather-bound books, polished silver picture frames, and swept away cobwebs from corners where memories had been left to gather dust. In each room, she felt the same strange familiarity, as if she were walking through the setting of a half-remembered dream. In the late afternoon, while Martha was busy with dinner preparations, Abigail found herself drawn back to the piano. The house was quiet, the family out on business. Surely it wouldn't hurt to touch it one more time. This time, when her fingers found the keys, a different melody emerged, lighter, almost playful. She closed her eyes, letting the notes carry her somewhere beyond the confines of the dusty room. She didn't hear the footsteps, didn't sense the presence in the doorway until the last note faded. That was her favorite, came a deep voice. Abigail startled, nearly falling from the bench. James Fairchild stood watching her, his expression unreadable. Mr. Fairchild, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have. He raised a hand. Please don't apologize. I'm the one who intruded. He stepped further into the room, looking around as if seeing it for the first time in years. You play beautifully. Thank you, sir. But I don't actually play, not really. She looked down at her hands. I never learned. His eyebrows rose. Then how? I don't know. The melody just comes to me when I touch the keys. She hesitated. Martha said it was Mrs. Fairchild's composition. Yes. He moved closer, studying her face. Josephine wrote that for our 10th anniversary, she called it Summer Whispers. No one else has ever played it. She never wrote it down. Abigail felt a flutter of unease. Perhaps I heard it somewhere before. Impossible. His voice was soft but certain. It was never performed outside these walls. An uncomfortable silence stretched between them. You remind me of her, he finally said. Not just your appearance, though there is a resemblance. There's something in your manner, the way you move through a room. I'm honored by the comparison, sir. Abigail stood, replacing the cover over the keys. Mrs. Fairchild must have been remarkable. A shadow passed over his face. She was the light of this house. When she disappeared, she took that light with her. What happened to her? Abigail asked, then immediately regretted her boldness. I'm sorry. It's not my place to ask. To her surprise, he didn't rebuke her. No one knows. She simply vanished one night. The police found nothing. No body. No evidence of foul play, just gone. He touched the piano lightly. The only thing missing was her engagement ring. I had it inscribed, "For always, my love." The words sent an unexpected jolt through Abigail. For a moment, she felt dizzy, as if the floor were tilting beneath her. Are you all right? James asked, concern crossing his features. Yes, sir, just tired, I think. He nodded. You've done good work here today. Perhaps you could continue tomorrow. I'd like to see these rooms restored. Of course, sir. As he turned to leave, he paused. Miss Foster, would you mind playing again sometime? The house has been silent too long. Before she could answer, a crash sounded from the hallway. They rushed out to find Martha kneeling beside a shattered vase, Lorraine standing over her. It was an accident, Miss Fairchild, Martha was saying, her hands trembling as she gathered the pieces. Accidents seemed to be happening frequently since Miss Foster arrived, Lorraine said coldly, her eyes finding Abigail in the doorway with James. Something dangerous flashed in her gaze. It was my fault, Martha insisted. I wasn't watching where I was going. Leave it, Martha, James said. It's just a vase. It was Mother's favorite, Lorraine countered. It was a thing, Lorraine. Just a thing. James's voice held a weariness that suggested this was an old argument. He turned to Abigail. Miss Foster, would you help Martha clean this up? Of course, sir. As Abigail knelt beside Martha, Lorraine's voice dropped to a whisper meant only for her brother. You're getting attached to the help now. How predictable. Enough, Lorraine. She's been here one day and already you're allowing her into Josephine's rooms, letting her play Josephine's piano. I said enough. James's voice had an edge that silenced even Lorraine. He walked away without another word. Later that evening, as Abigail prepared to leave for the day, she noticed something glinting on Mr. Fairchild's desk in the study. A diamond ring, large and ostentatious. Catching the light from the desk lamp, his late mother's ring. Martha had told her when she'd seen it earlier, a family heirloom worth more than Abigail would earn in a lifetime. Little did she know that by the next evening, that ring would be gone, and all eyes would turn to her. The following day dawned with an ominous stillness over Fairchild Estate. Abigail arrived to find Martha pacing nervously near the service entrance, wringing her weathered hands. Martha, is everything all right? Abigail asked, setting down her worn canvas bag. Oh, Miss Foster, Martha whispered, glancing over her shoulder. There's trouble, Mr. Fairchild's mother's ring is missing from his study. A cold weight settled in Abigail's stomach. The diamond ring! When did he notice it was gone? This morning, Miss Lorraine is beside herself. Martha's voice dropped even lower. They're checking every room, questioning all the staff. Before Abigail could respond, Lorraine's voice cut through the air like a steel blade. Miss Foster, your presence is required in the main hall. Immediately, Lorraine stood at the end of the corridor, her figure silhouetted against the morning light streaming through the windows, giving her an almost spectral appearance. Without waiting for acknowledgement, she turned and walked away, clearly expecting Abigail to follow in the main hall. James Fairchild stood by the grand staircase, his face a mask of controlled anger. 3 other staff members, the gardener, the cook, and the chauffeur, were already assembled, all looking uncomfortable. Ah, Miss Foster, Lorraine said as they entered. Now we can begin. She turned to address the assembled staff. As you may have heard, a valuable family heirloom has gone missing from my brother's study, Mother's diamond ring, worth more than most of you would see in a decade of service. James cleared his throat. Lorraine, perhaps we could handle this with more discretion. Discretion, Lorraine cut him off. But a theft has occurred in our home, James. There's no room for softness now. She began to pace before the line of staff members. The ring was last seen yesterday afternoon, securely placed in my brother's desk drawer. The only people with access to the study since then have been family and staff. Her cold gaze swept over each face. I've already had your quarters searched. You did what? James interjected, genuine surprise in his voice. I gave no such authorization. Lorraine waved a dismissive hand. It was necessary, brother, and most revealing. She stopped directly in front of Abigail. Nothing was found in the long-term staff quarters. However, in Miss Foster's bag, we found this. From her pocket, Lorraine produced a small velvet pouch. Opening it, she tipped the contents into her palm. A silver earring with a small diamond that caught the morning light. This is not Mother's ring, James said impatiently. No, Lorraine agreed. But it is Tiffany & Co. Hardly the sort of accessory a housemaid could afford on her wages, unless of course she has alternative sources of income. All eyes turned to Abigail, who felt the blood drain from her face. That was my mother's. My adoptive mother's. It's the only thing of value I own. A convenient story, Lorraine said, her voice dripping with skepticism. And what about this? She nodded to the butler, who stepped forward with Abigail's small canvas bag. He reached inside and withdrew a folded document. This was found hidden in the lining of her bag, Lorraine continued. A newspaper clipping about the Fairchild family from 2 years ago, detailing our assets and heirlooms. Abigail stared at the paper, genuinely bewildered. I've never seen that before in my life. Someone must have placed it there. Miss Foster, James said, his voice tight with controlled anger. Are you suggesting that someone in this household planted evidence against you? Abigail faltered, suddenly aware of how her accusation sounded. I don't know how it got there, sir, but I did not take your mother's ring. I would never steal from anyone. Lies, Lorraine hissed. You wormed your way into this household with your innocent act, but I've been watching you. Your uncomfortable interest in Josephine's things, your unexplained knowledge of her music, It all points to someone who came here with ulterior motives. That's not true, Abigail protested, feeling increasingly trapped. She looked to James, hoping to find some reason in his eyes, but saw only cold suspicion. Mr. Fairchild, please, she implored. I've done nothing wrong. James's expression hardened. The evidence suggests otherwise, Miss Foster. Evidence that could have been planted, Martha suddenly interjected, stepping forward. Sir, I've worked with Miss Foster closely these past 2 days. She's honest and hard-working. Step back. Martha, Lorraine commanded. Your judgment is clearly compromised by your affection for the girl. Martha stood her ground. No disrespect intended, Miss Lorraine, but I've served this family for 40 years. I know character when I see it. And yet you failed to see the thief operating under your supervision, Lorraine countered coldly. James raised a hand, silencing them both. Martha, while I respect your loyalty, the facts are difficult to ignore. He turned to Abigail, his expression severe. Miss Foster, in light of these circumstances, your employment at Fairchild Estate is terminated, effective immediately. Abigail felt as if the floor had dropped away beneath her. Mr. Fairchild, I swear to you on my life that I did not take that ring. The decision is made, he replied, his voice flat. You will be escorted from the property. Consider yourself fortunate that we are not involving the authorities. Tears stung Abigail's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. May I at least collect my things? They will be brought to you, Lorraine said with finality. We can't risk allowing you back into the house. Martha made a small sound of protest, but was silenced by a warning look from James. The elderly housekeeper's eyes filled with helpless tears as she looked at Abigail. Come with me, Miss Foster, the butler said formally, gesturing toward the door, as Abigail was led away. She held her head high despite the humiliation burning through her. Behind her, she heard Lorraine's voice, quiet but clearly audible. I told you she couldn't be trusted, James. There was something about her from the start, outside. Abigail stood at the end of the long driveway, waiting for the butler to return with her meager belongings. The sprawling estate that had felt so strangely familiar now loomed before her like an accusing monolith. How had everything gone so wrong so quickly? A few minutes later, Martha appeared instead of the butler, hurrying down the drive with Abigail's bag clutched to her chest. I insisted on bringing this to you myself, she said breathlessly, handing over the bag. Child, I am so sorry. This isn't right. Thank you for believing me, Abigail said quietly. It means more than you know. Martha glanced over her shoulder nervously. There's something not right about all this. The timing. The way that clipping appeared. Be careful, Miss Foster. What do you mean? Martha leaned closer. Miss Lorraine has never tolerated anyone who reminds her brother of Josephine. And you. There's something about you that stirred this house from its slumber. She pressed something into Abigail's palm. My address, if you need anything at all. Before Abigail could thank her again, the elderly woman hurried back toward the house, her shoulders hunched as if carrying an invisible burden. Alone on the dusty road, Abigail finally allowed her tears to fall, not just tears of humiliation or anger, but of profound loss, as if she'd been robbed of something she couldn't quite name. In her distress, she failed to notice that her small canvas bag had torn slightly at the bottom seam, the weight of her belongings pulling at the worn fabric. As she walked away from Fairchild Estate, something small and golden slipped from the tier and fell silently into the tall grass beside the road. A simple gold band with an inscription worn nearly smooth by decades of handling. For always, my love. 2 days after Abigail's dismissal, Lorraine Fairchild stood in the library, methodically sorting through the mail when Martha entered with a tea tray. Your afternoon tea, Miss Lorraine. Set it down. Martha. Lorraine didn't look up from her correspondence. And has there been any sign of Mother's ring? No, ma'am. Martha arranged the tea service, her movements precise despite her age. Perhaps it was simply misplaced. Lorraine shot her a withering look. Diamonds don't misplace themselves. That Foster girl took it, plain as day. As Martha turned to leave, Lorraine noticed something clutched in her hand. What's that you're holding? Martha hesitated. Just some personal items Miss Foster left behind. I was going to send them to her. Give them to me. Lorraine extended her hand imperiously. Miss Lorraine, this is the girl's private property, which she abandoned in our home after stealing from us, Lorraine snapped. Hand it over now. Reluctantly, Martha surrendered a small cloth bag. It was found near the hedge at the end of the drive, The groundskeeper brought it in this morning. Lorraine dismissed Martha with a wave, waiting until the door closed before emptying the contents onto the table. A tattered paperback novel, a small hairbrush, a handkerchief embroidered with the initials AF, nothing of interest, until her fingers closed around something small and metallic at the bottom of the bag. A ring, not her mother's ostentatious diamond, but a simple gold band, worn thin with age. Lorraine held it up to the light, turning it slowly between her fingers. Inside the band, barely visible through years of wear, was an inscription. Her blood ran cold as she made out the words, "For always, my love." "Impossible," she whispered, her composure cracking for the first time in decades. With trembling hands, she slipped the ring into her pocket, just as the library door opened. "Lorraine," James stood in the doorway, looking more animated than he had in days. "Have you seen the financial reports I left on my desk? I need to review them before the bank meeting." "I haven't touched your papers," she replied, quickly gathering Abigail's belongings and shoving them into a drawer. "You probably misplaced them, as you do everything else." James frowned at her tone. "Are you feeling unwell? You look pale." "I'm fine," she said sharply. "Just tired of dealing with the aftermath of your hiring decisions." His expression darkened. "If you're referring to Miss Foster, who else would I mean?" Lorraine cut him off. "The girl was clearly a thief, yet you seem almost regretful about dismissing her." "I regret that someone who showed such promise turned out to be dishonest," James said carefully, "but the evidence was compelling. I did what was necessary." Lorraine's fingers closed around the ring in her pocket. "Yes," she murmured. "Sometimes difficult decisions are necessary for the greater good." After James left, Lorraine sat motionless, staring at nothing. After 30 years of careful control, how could the past resurface now? And through this girl, of all people, the resemblance, the music, and now the ring. It was too much to be coincidence. She needed to act quickly. Across town in a rundown boarding house, Abigail sat on the edge of a narrow bed, counting the last of her savings without references from the Fairchilds. Finding new employment would be nearly impossible. The accusation of theft would follow her through Savannah's close-knit society like a shadow. A knock at her door startled her. The landlady stood there, a suspicious look on her face. "There's a man asking for you downstairs. Says he's from Fairchild Estate." Abigail's heart jumped. Did he give a name? "Mr. Fairchild himself. Says it's urgent." Making her way downstairs, Abigail found James Fairchild standing in the shabby entryway, looking distinctly out of place in his tailored suit. His face was grave, his eyes intense. "Miss Foster," he acknowledged stiffly. "We need to talk." Privately, the landlady pointed them to a small sitting room off the main hall. Once alone, James wasted no time. "Something has been discovered at the estate," he said without preamble. "A ring." "The diamond?" Abigail asked hopefully. "So you know I didn't take it." "Not the diamond, another ring." His voice was tight with controlled emotion. "A gold band with an inscription, 'For always, my love.'" Abigail's breath caught. Her hand reflexively went to her bag, which wasn't there. "My ring," she whispered. "It must have fallen from my bag when I left." "Your ring." James stepped closer, his intensity almost frightening. "Where did you get it?" "It was given to me by my adoptive mother when I was 16, Abigail explained. Unnerved by his reaction, she said it was found with me when I was discovered as an infant. "It's the only link I have to my birth parents." "Discovered," James repeated, his voice strained. "What do you mean, discovered?" Abigail hesitated, then decided she had nothing to lose by telling him the truth. "I was abandoned as a newborn on the doorstep of a rural clinic. A nurse found me and brought me to her sister, the woman who raised me. The ring was wrapped in the blanket I was swaddled in." James's face had gone ashen. "This clinic, where was it?" "Somewhere in the backcountry, near the Georgia-South Carolina border. My adoptive mother never knew exactly where." "And when was this?" 30 years ago in November." James staggered slightly, reaching for the back of a chair to steady himself. "November," he repeated. "The same month Josephine disappeared." Abigail watched him warily. "Mr. Fairchild, why are you asking me these questions? What does my ring have to do with your wife?" He looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time, really seeing her. "That ring," he said hoarsely, "is identical to the one I gave Josephine on our wedding day, the one she was wearing when she vanished." The room seemed to tilt around Abigail. That's not possible. The timing, the resemblance, the music you somehow know." James ran a hand through his silver hair. "I need to be certain. Will you permit me to hire an investigator to look into your background, the circumstances of your discovery?" "An investigator," Abigail repeated, overwhelmed. "I don't understand what you're suggesting." "I'm not certain myself," James admitted, "but I need to know, and I think perhaps you do too." Abigail thought of the strange connection she'd felt to Fairchild Estate, the melodies that had come to her unbidden, the sense of loss she couldn't explain. "Yes," she said finally, "I want to know." James nodded, some of his composure returning. "I know a man, Samuel Reed, discreet, thorough. He can begin immediately." He hesitated. "And I owe you an apology for the accusation of theft. It was hasty and unfounded." "You believed what the evidence suggested," Abigail said, though the hurt was still fresh. "Evidence can be manipulated," James replied, a new suspicion dawning in his eyes. "I see that now." As they made arrangements to meet the investigator the following day, neither of them noticed the shadow that passed briefly across the window, a figure who had followed James from the estate and listened to every word of their conversation. Lorraine Fairchild stepped away from the boarding house, her face set in determined lines. She took out her cell phone and dialed a number she hadn't used in years. "It's Lorraine Fairchild," she said when the call connected. "We have a situation. The girl. She has the ring, and James is asking questions." She listened for a moment. "Yes, find everything you can about a clinic on the Georgia-South Carolina border, and do it quickly. We need to clean this up before it goes any further." She ended the call and glanced back at the boarding house, where her brother and the girl still talked. 30 years of careful work, she murmured to herself. "I won't let it unravel now." Samuel Reed had the watchful eyes of a man who noticed everything, and the patient demeanor of someone used to waiting for truth to reveal itself. At 57, the private investigator had earned a reputation for discretion and thoroughness that made him the first choice for Savannah's elite when delicate matters needed resolution. "Mr. Fairchild," Reed said, shaking James's hand firmly before turning to Abigail. "Miss Foster, a pleasure to meet you both." They sat in a quiet corner of a downtown cafe. Chosen for its privacy, James had insisted on neutral ground for their meeting, away from both the estate and Abigail's boarding house. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," James said, sliding a manila envelope across the table. "Everything I know is in here. Dates, names, the circumstances as we understand them." Reed nodded, tucking the envelope into his weathered leather briefcase without opening it. "Why don't you tell me in your own words what you're looking for?" James glanced at Abigail, then back to Reed. "I believe Miss Foster may be connected to my wife's disappearance 30 years ago." "Connected how?" Reed asked, his expression neutral. "She may be our daughter," James said quietly. Reed's eyebrows rose slightly, the only indication of surprise from the seasoned investigator. "I see. And what evidence points to this possibility?" James explained about the ring, the timing of Abigail's discovery as an infant, and the inexplicable knowledge of Josephine's music. Reed listened without interruption, occasionally making notes in a small leather-bound notebook. "Miss Foster," Reed finally said, turning his attention to Abigail. "What do you know about your origins?" "Very little," she admitted. "My adoptive mother, Eleanor Foster, was a school teacher in a small town outside Savannah. Her sister was a nurse at a rural clinic. According to Eleanor, her sister found me abandoned at the clinic door one November morning in 1994. There was no note, just a gold ring wrapped in my blanket. And this sister's name, Margaret Collins. She died when I was 7. Eleanor raised me alone after that. And Eleanor," Abigail's eyes dimmed, "passed away last year. Cancer." Reed nodded sympathetically. "So there's no one who can corroborate the circumstances of your discovery?" "No," Abigail said softly. "Just the ring, which is currently in my sister's possession," James added, a hint of anger in his voice. Reed made another note. "I'll need to see it, and I'll need DNA samples from both of you." "Already arranged," James said. "Our family doctor will collect them this afternoon." "Good." Reed closed his notebook. "I'll begin with the clinic. Do you know which one it was, Miss Foster?" "Eleanor mentioned it was somewhere near the Georgia-South Carolina border, but I don't have a name. There weren't many rural health facilities in that area 30 years ago," Reed mused. "I'll find it." He stood, gathering his briefcase. "I'll be in touch within a few days. In the meantime, keep a low profile. Investigations like this can stir up unexpected reactions." After Reed departed, James and Abigail sat in uncomfortable silence. "Are you returning to the estate?" Abigail finally asked. James hesitated. "Yes, Lorraine doesn't know I'm meeting with you. I think it's best to keep it that way for now. You suspect your own sister. Abigail couldn't hide her surprise. James's expression hardened. I don't know what to think anymore. The diamond ring still hasn't turned up. The evidence against you was too convenient. And Lorraine has always what? She never approved of my marriage to Josephine, he said carefully. Josephine came from modest means. A music teacher's daughter, Lorraine thought she was beneath our family station. That seems like a harsh judgment. Lorraine can be harsh when it comes to protecting what she considers our family legacy. James stood, placing money on the table for their coffee. I should go. Reed will contact us soon. As Abigail watched him leave, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd stepped into something far more dangerous than she realized. At Fairchild Estate, Martha was dusting the library when the door suddenly opened. She jumped, nearly dropping her feather duster when Lorraine entered. Oh, Miss Lorraine, you startled me. Lorraine's sharp eyes scanned the room. Have you seen my brother? Mr. Fairchild went out early this morning. He didn't say where he was going. Lorraine's lips thinned with displeasure. When he returns, tell him I need to speak with him immediately. She turned to leave, then paused. Martha, you've served this family faithfully for many years. Yes, Miss Lorraine. Martha straightened, wary of the unusual preamble. In all that time, have I ever given you reason to doubt my dedication to my brother's well-being? Martha chose her words carefully. You've always been protective of Mr. Fairchild and the family interests. Exactly. Everything I've done has been for him, for this family. Lorraine stepped closer. Which is why I find it disturbing that you've been in contact with that foster girl. Martha paled. I don't know what you mean. Don't lie to me, Lorraine said softly, her voice all the more threatening for its quietness. One of the gardeners saw you at the bus stop yesterday speaking with her. Martha's hands trembled. I was simply returning something she'd left behind. What did you tell her about this family, about Josephine? Nothing, Miss Lorraine, I swear it. Lorraine studied her for a long moment. I've always valued your service, Martha. It would be a shame to end your employment under a cloud of disloyalty, especially at your age, with your modest savings. The threat hung in the air between them. Martha's shoulders slumped. I meant no disloyalty. Of course not. Lorraine smiled thinly. I'm sure you simply made a momentary error in judgment, one that won't be repeated. Martha nodded silently, fear evident in her eyes. Good. Now, return to your duties. And remember, the foster girl is no longer any concern of this household. As Lorraine left, Martha clutched the edge of the table for support, her heart racing. She knew too much, had seen too much on the night Josephine disappeared. For 30 years, she'd kept her suspicions buried, telling herself she had no proof. But now, with Abigail's appearance and the uncanny resemblances, she had to warn them. Samuel Reed sat in his car outside a dilapidated building with a faded sign. Pinewood Rural Health Clinic, closed. Located in a nearly abandoned crossroads town straddling the Georgia-South Carolina line, the clinic had shut down 15 years ago. According to local sources, Reed snapped photos of the exterior, then tried the door, locked as expected through grimy windows. He could see overturned furniture and water-damaged ceiling tiles, the result of years of neglect. His phone rang. Reed, he answered. It's Fairchild. Any progress? I've located the clinic. Abandoned now. I'm going to see if I can access any records. And, James prompted, and I found something interesting about your sister. James's voice tightened. What about her? In November 1994, the month your wife disappeared, Lorraine made 6 large withdrawals from her personal account, total of just over $50,000, cash. A heavy silence filled the line. That's substantial. Yes, and there's more. I've been asking around about Margaret Collins, the nurse who supposedly found Abigail. No record of anyone by that name working at the clinic. What are you saying? I'm not drawing conclusions yet, Reed said carefully. But the circumstances are troubling. I need to find those clinic records. Do whatever's necessary, James said firmly. Cost is no object. After hanging up, Reed approached the clinic again, this time circling to the back. A rusted fire escape led to a second-floor window with a broken pane. Not ideal, but it would have to do. Inside, the air was musty and still. Filing cabinets lined one wall of what had been an administrative office, many tipped over. Their contents spilled across the floor. Reed began methodically photographing anything with dates from late 1994. In a bottom drawer, he found a water-damaged logbook, flipping through the sodden pages. He stopped at a November entry with a hastily scrawled note, Patient JF, transferred to St. Catherine's per LF instructions. JF Josephine Fairchild and LF Lorraine Fairchild. Reed photographed the page, then continued searching. In another cabinet he found employee records. No Margaret Collins, but there was a Margaret Conway who'd worked as a night nurse during that period. As Reed was photographing these documents, he heard the unmistakable sound of a car pulling up outside, moving cautiously to the window. He saw a black sedan with tinted windows. A man in a dark suit emerged and approached the clinic. Reed quickly gathered his evidence and slipped toward the back exit. Whatever was happening here went deeper than a simple missing persons case, and someone else was now looking for the same answers. Miss Foster, there's someone here to see you. Abigail looked up from the newspaper classifieds where she'd been circling potential job opportunities. Her landlady stood in the doorway, her expression unusually concerned. Who is it? Abigail asked. Setting aside the paper, Martha Sullivan from Fairchild Estate. She seems quite agitated. Abigail hurried downstairs to find Martha waiting in the small entryway, nervously clutching her handbag. The elderly housekeeper's face was pale, her eyes darting toward the windows as if expecting to be followed. Martha, what's wrong? We need to talk privately, Martha whispered. It's not safe at the estate anymore. Abigail led her to the small garden behind the boarding house, where a weathered bench sat beneath an ancient magnolia tree. Once seated, Martha took a deep breath. Miss Lorraine knows I've been speaking with you. She threatened my position. That's terrible, Abigail said, anger flaring. She has no right. Listen to me, Martha interrupted urgently. There's something you need to know. Something I should have told you, told someone years ago. She glanced around again before continuing. The night Mrs. Josephine disappeared. I saw things. Abigail leaned closer. What things? I heard arguing from Mrs. Josephine's rooms. Her and Miss Lorraine. It was late, past midnight. I was worried, so I stayed nearby, in the service hallway. Martha's hands trembled. Mrs. Josephine sounded frightened. She accused Miss Lorraine of tampering with her tea. Said she'd been feeling ill for weeks. Miss Lorraine called her paranoid. Said pregnancy was making her delusional. Pregnancy, Abigail echoed, her heart skipping a beat. Martha nodded. Mrs. Josephine was expecting about 7 months along. She and Mr. James were overjoyed. But Miss Lorraine, she shook her head. She was furious when she found out. Said Mrs. Josephine had trapped her brother, was trying to secure her position through a child. What happened next? There was a crash, like furniture overturning. I was about to knock when I saw Miss Lorraine come out. She looked different, cold, calculating. She was carrying Mrs. Josephine's little travel bag. When she saw me, she said Mrs. Josephine had taken ill and needed to be driven to the hospital. Told me to stay with Mr. James, who was away on business in Atlanta, and explain when he returned. Martha took a shaky breath. I knew something was wrong, but I was afraid to question her. The next morning, Mr. James returned early. Miss Lorraine told him his wife had left him, run away in the night. She showed him a note, a goodbye letter, supposedly from Mrs. Josephine. Said she couldn't bear the constraints of their life anymore. Needed her freedom. Martha's eyes filled with tears. Mr. James was devastated, but the handwriting, it didn't look right to me. Mrs. Josephine had such elegant penmanship from her years of music training. This was different, but who would listen to a housekeeper's suspicions against a Fairchild? Abigail sat back, stunned. You think Lorraine did something to Josephine? I don't know, Martha admitted, but there's more. After Mrs. Josephine disappeared, Miss Lorraine began renovating the east wing, where Mrs. Josephine's rooms were, had everything torn out, walls repainted, new furniture, as if she was erasing any trace of her. Did you tell any of this to Mr. Fairchild? I tried once, suggested that the note might not have been genuine. Miss Lorraine overheard, and nearly had me dismissed on the spot, called me a gossip monger, said I was cruel to give Mr. James false hope. Martha's voice dropped. After that, I kept my head down. I had nowhere else to go. She reached into her handbag and withdrew a small leather-bound book. But I kept this, found it while cleaning out Mrs. Josephine's rooms before the renovation. It was hidden in a secret compartment in her writing desk. Abigail took the book with trembling hands. Her diary. Martha nodded. The last few entries. They're disturbing. She suspected Miss Lorraine was poisoning her slowly. Wrote about feeling increasingly weak, dizzy spells. She was planning to confront Mr. James when he returned from Atlanta, but she never got the chance. Abigail whispered. No. Martha placed a weathered hand over Abigail's. Read it. There might be something in there that could help Mr. Reed's investigation. As Martha rose to leave, Abigail caught her arm. You're risking everything by bringing this to me. A sad smile crossed the housekeeper's face. I'm an old woman with too many regrets already. I should have spoken up 30 years ago. Maybe if I had, Mrs. Josephine would still be alive. And you, her voice broke, you wouldn't have grown up without your parents. After Martha left, Abigail sat alone in the garden, the diary heavy in her hands. With a deep breath, she opened it to the final entries. October 15th, 1994. James left for Atlanta today. I didn't want him to go, but I couldn't explain my fears without proof. Lorraine brought tea again this afternoon. I pretended to drink it, but poured it into the planter when she wasn't looking. The orchid was dead by evening. I'm not imagining this. She's trying to harm me, or the baby. But why? What could she possibly gain? October 20th, 1994. The dizziness is worse. Dr. Miller says it's normal in the 3rd trimester, but I know better. I've started saving samples of everything Lorraine brings me. James returns in 3 days. I'll show him then. Make him understand. November 2nd, 1994. I found something today. Financial documents in Lorraine's desk showing she's nearly bankrupt. She's been embezzling from the family foundation for years. If James discovers this, she'll be ruined. Is that why she wants me gone? She knows I've seen the books, that I've been questioning the foundation's finances. The baby kicked so strongly today. I've decided on a name. Abigail, after my grandmother, my little Abby. I have to protect her. The final entry was dated November 5th, 1994. The night Josephine disappeared. The handwriting was shaky. Urgent. She knows I know. Confronted her today about the foundation money. She didn't deny it, just smiled that cold smile, said no one would believe me over her. Tonight I'm packing essentials, will leave at dawn, go to James in Atlanta, can't risk staying another. The entry ended abruptly. Mid-sentence. Abigail stared at the unfinished words, a chill running through her. She needed to get this diary to James and Samuel Reed immediately. As she rose to leave, a shadow fell across the garden path. A tall man in a dark suit stood watching her, his expression unreadable. Miss Foster. His voice was professionally neutral. My name is Howard Blackwood. I represent the interests of Lorraine Fairchild. She'd like to speak with you. Abigail clutched the diary tighter, concealing it in the folds of her skirt. I have nothing to say to Miss Fairchild. She thought you might feel that way. The man stepped closer. She's prepared to be quite generous. $50,000 in exchange for you leaving Savannah today. $50,000, Abigail repeated, stunned by the amount. Cash, no questions asked. He produced an envelope from his jacket. All she asks is that you cease contact with James Fairchild and take whatever theories or artifacts you might have collected with you. Abigail's fingers tightened around the diary. This wasn't just a bribe. It was confirmation. Lorraine was afraid of what she might discover. Please tell Miss Fairchild that my history is not for sale, she said firmly, backing away. The man's expression hardened. Miss Foster, let me be clear. This situation could become unpleasant if you refuse. Miss Fairchild can make life very difficult for someone in your position. Is that a threat? A reality check. You're alone, with limited resources, making extraordinary claims about one of Savannah's most prominent families. He extended the envelope again. Take the money. Start fresh somewhere else. It's the sensible choice. Before Abigail could respond, a car pulled up to the curb. Samuel Reed stepped out, his keen eyes taking in the scene. Everything all right here, Miss Foster? He called. Blackwood withdrew the envelope, his expression cooling. Consider the offer. It expires at midnight. With a curt nod to Reed, he walked away. Who was that? Reed asked, approaching Abigail. She told him about the encounter, then showed him the diary. Martha brought it to me. It's Josephine's. Reed's eyes widened as he skimmed the final entries. This changes everything. We need to get this to James immediately. He glanced in the direction Blackwood had gone. And we need to move quickly. If Lorraine is making cash offers, she's desperate. Desperate people make dangerous decisions. As they hurried to Reed's car, Abigail felt a strange mix of fear and validation. For the first time since discovering the ring, she had concrete evidence linking her to Josephine Fairchild, and pointing to a truth far darker than she had imagined. James Fairchild stood in his study, staring down at the diary pages spread across his desk. Each word in Josephine's elegant handwriting was like a knife twisting in his chest. She was trying to reach me, he said hoarsely. All this time, I believed she'd abandoned me. Abandoned us. Samuel Reed watched him carefully. The evidence suggests she was attempting to flee to safety that night. And the baby? James's voice broke. My daughter. She was carrying our daughter. Abigail stood silently by the window. Feeling like an intruder in this moment of raw grief, the DNA test results had arrived that morning, confirming what they had begun to suspect. She was, with 99.8% certainty, the biological daughter of James and Josephine Fairchild. I should have protected them, James whispered, his fingers tracing Josephine's final, unfinished entry. I should have seen what Lorraine was doing. Reed cleared his throat. Mr. Fairchild, I've found more. The clinic records mention a patient transfer to St. Catherine's, authorized by someone with the initials LF. St. Catherine's. James looked up sharply. I've never heard of it. It was a private facility on the outskirts of Savannah, Reed explained. Closed down about 15 years ago after several ethics investigations. It specialized in discreet care for wealthy families dealing with inconvenient situations, mental illness, addiction, unwanted pregnancies. Abigail translated quietly. Reed nodded. I tracked down a former administrator who was willing to talk. For a price. She remembers a pregnant woman brought in around November 1994 by a society lady who paid cash for complete confidentiality. The pregnant woman was heavily sedated, kept isolated. Josephine, James breathed, his face ashen. The administrator couldn't confirm the name. Records were deliberately sparse, but the timing matches. The woman gave birth there in late November. According to the administrator, the baby was supposed to be disposed of, but a night nurse took pity and smuggled the infant out instead. Margaret Conway, Abigail said. My adoptive mother's sister. That's my theory, Reed agreed. Conway disappeared shortly after, probably fearing repercussions. The baby, you, Miss Foster, ended up with Eleanor. And Josephine? James asked. Clearly dreading the answer, Reed hesitated. The administrator claimed the woman remained at the facility for some time. Months, possibly years. She'd been given drugs that affected her memory, her cognitive abilities. Eventually she was transferred elsewhere. The administrator didn't know where. A heavy silence filled the room. Abigail watched James struggle to process this horrific revelation, that his wife hadn't abandoned him, but had been held prisoner while he had given up searching for her. She could still be alive, James said finally, a dangerous hope kindling in his eyes. It's possible, Reed acknowledged cautiously. But it's been 30 years, Mr. Fairchild. Even if she survived, the kind of treatment she received at St. Catherine's would have caused significant damage. I need to know, James insisted. If there's any chance at all, that Josephine is still out there, I'll continue the search, Reed promised, starting with facilities that might have taken transfers from St. Catherine's when it closed. The study door opened suddenly, and Martha appeared, her face tight with fear. Mr. James, she whispered urgently. Miss Lorraine is returning. Her car just turned into the drive. James straightened, a cold determination replacing his grief. Thank you, Martha. Please show Mr. Reed and Miss Foster to the garden house. They can exit through the back gate without being seen, as Martha hurried them through the mansion's back corridors. Abigail glanced at James. What are you going to do? What I should have done 30 years ago, he replied grimly. Confront my sister. In the garden house, Reed spread a map across the table while Abigail paced nervously. These are the facilities within a 100-mile radius that might have accepted transfers from St. Catherine's, he explained, circling several locations. Psychiatric hospitals, long-term care facilities, religious retreats that took in troubled women. There are so many, Abigail said, dismayed. We'll check them all if necessary, Reed assured her. But first, he was interrupted by his phone. Excuse me, Reed speaking. As he took the call, Abigail moved to the window, watching the main house through the study windows. She could see James and Lorraine in what appeared to be a heated argument. Lorraine's normally composed facade had cracked. Even from this distance, Abigail could see the fury in her gestures. Reed joined her at the window, his expression grave. That was my contact at the county records office. I asked him to check for any property holdings under Lorraine Fairchild's name. And she owns a small property about 30 miles outside Savannah, a cottage on isolated land, purchased 29 years ago through a shell company. He watched the confrontation in the main house. She's never declared it on any financial statements. Abigail's pulse quickened. I think we need to check it out immediately, Reed said, gathering his notes. before Lorraine realizes we know about it. The drive to Lorraine's secret property took them through increasingly remote country roads. Finally, Reed turned onto an overgrown dirt track barely wide enough for his car. After a mile of dense forest, they emerged into a small clearing where a modest cottage stood, its windows darkened. "Stay in the car until I've checked the perimeter," Reed instructed, removing a small handgun from his glove compartment. "You carry a gun?" Abigail asked, startled. "In my line of work, it's occasionally necessary." He offered a grim smile. "Let's hope today isn't one of those occasions." Abigail watched anxiously as Reed circled the cottage, peering through windows. After several tense minutes, he returned to the car. Place looks abandoned, but there are signs someone visits regularly. No car, no lights, but the path to the door is kept clear, and there's a new lock on the front door. "Can we get in?" Reed hesitated. "Legally speaking, we shouldn't. And morally speaking, if my mother is in there..." "Stay behind me," Reed conceded. Leading her toward the cottage, the lock yielded to Reed's expertise with surprising ease. The interior was simple but well-maintained, a small living area, a kitchenette, and 2 doors leading to what Abigail presumed were bedrooms. "Hello," she called softly. "Is anyone here?" Silence answered her. Silence. Reed moved cautiously toward the first door, pushing it open to reveal a small bedroom with a neatly made bed. Nothing unusual. The second door was locked. "Stand back," Reed murmured, working on this lock as well. When it finally opened, Abigail gasped. Unlike the rest of the cottage, this room was clearly lived in. A bed with rumpled sheets, books stacked on a nightstand, a rocking chair by the window where someone had been sitting recently enough to leave an impression in the cushion. But it was the wall above the bed that sent a chill through Abigail. Dozens of drawings, childlike in execution but haunting in their repetition. The same image over and over. A grand piano, a woman playing, a man listening, a baby in a cradle. "She remembers," Abigail whispered, her throat tight. Somewhere inside, she remembers her family. Reed moved to the bedside table and picked up a prescription bottle. "Heavy antipsychotics," he said, reading the label, "filled last week at a pharmacy in Savannah." "Lorraine is still drugging her?" Abigail asked, horrified. "Looks that way." Reed checked the closet, finding simple dresses and a worn robe. "But where is she now?" A sudden noise from outside froze them both. Car tires on gravel. A door slamming. Reed moved quickly to the window. "It's Lorraine," he said tensely. "And she's not alone." Through the partially open blinds, Abigail saw Lorraine Fairchild emerge from a black sedan, followed by an elderly woman in a simple dress. The woman moved slowly, unsurely, supported by Lorraine's firm grip on her arm. Even from this distance, even after 30 years, there was no mistaking her face. "Mother," Abigail breathed, her heart pounding. "It's her, it's Josephine." Reed pulled her away from the window. "We need to leave now. If Lorraine finds us here, I'm not leaving without her," Abigail insisted. "We're not prepared for a confrontation," Reed argued. "We need to call the police, do this legally." Before Abigail could respond, they heard the front door open. "Almost there, Josephine," came Lorraine's falsely cheerful voice. "The doctor says the new medication will help with your delusions. Isn't that wonderful?" Reed pulled Abigail into the closet, closing the door quietly behind them. Through a crack, they watched as Lorraine led the frail woman to the bed. "I saw him," Josephine said, her voice thin but clear. "I know I did." "You were confused, dear," Lorraine said soothingly, removing a syringe from her purse. "James is gone, remember? He died years ago." "No," Josephine protested weakly as Lorraine prepared the injection. "He was there, at the church, and the girl, she looks like me. Just your imagination," Lorraine murmured. "Now hold still. This will help you rest." In the closet, Abigail's fingers closed around a heavy wooden hanger. Before Reed could stop her, she burst from their hiding place. "Get away from her!" she shouted. Lorraine whirled, the syringe still in her hand, her face a mask of shocked fury. "You!" Josephine looked from Lorraine to Abigail, her confused eyes slowly widening with recognition. "I know you," she whispered. "I know your face." "How did you find this place?" Lorraine demanded, her voice dangerously low. She shifted her body to stand between Josephine and Abigail, the syringe still clutched in her hand. Samuel Reed emerged from the closet, his gun trained steadily on Lorraine. "Put the syringe down, Ms. Fairchild." Lorraine's eyes darted from Reed to the weapon, her mind visibly calculating her options. This is private property. You're trespassing. And you're holding a woman against her will, Reed countered. Put it down now. With a look of cold fury, Lorraine slowly placed the syringe on the nightstand. You have no idea what you're interfering with. This woman requires specialized care. Care, Abigail echoed incredulously. You've been drugging her for 30 years. Josephine sat motionless on the bed, her thin fingers plucking anxiously at the bedspread. Though in her early 60s, she looked much older, her once lustrous dark hair now gray and brittle, her face lined with decades of confusion and fear. Yet beneath the damage, Abigail could see echoes of the beautiful woman from James's photographs. Mother, Abigail said gently, taking a step forward. Josephine's eyes, the same hazel as Abigail's, flickered with uncertainty. I don't have children. They told me that. They lied, Abigail said, her voice breaking. My name is Abigail. I'm your daughter. This is absurd, Lorraine snapped. Josephine, don't listen to her. She's trying to confuse you. You're the one who's been confusing her, Reed said, keeping his gun trained on Lorraine while he used his free hand to dial his phone. I'm calling the police. Wait, Josephine said suddenly, her voice stronger. I want to understand. She looked at Abigail with desperate concentration, as if trying to pierce through a fog. You seem familiar, but everything seems familiar sometimes, and then it slips away. Abigail slowly approached the bed, ignoring Lorraine's venomous glare. I was born in November 1994 at St. Catherine's facility. A nurse named Margaret Conway saved me and brought me to her sister, who raised me. She knelt beside Josephine. I never knew my real parents, but I had this. From her pocket, Abigail withdrew the gold ring. Holding it out in her palm, Josephine stared at it, her breath catching. With trembling fingers, she reached out to touch the worn band. For always, my love, she whispered, reciting the inscription from memory. James gave it to you, Abigail said softly. On your wedding day. Tears filled Josephine's eyes. James, she repeated. Yes, James. Her face contorted with effort. He plays the piano. No, darling, Abigail corrected gently. You played the piano, you were a music teacher. A flash of clarity crossed Josephine's features. The piano, yes, I remember the music. Her fingers began to move, playing invisible keys, the same melody Abigail had unconsciously played at Fairchild Estate. Summer Whispers, Abigail said, humming along. Josephine's head snapped up, her eyes suddenly sharp. How do you know that name? No one knows that name except you and James, Abigail finished. I played it on your piano at the estate. Somehow, I knew it. Stop this at once, Lorraine commanded, her composure cracking. Josephine needs her medication. She becomes dangerously unstable without it. The only danger here is you, Reed said, his phone now pressed to his ear. Yes, I need police at 1782 Old Creek Road outside Savannah. We've found a woman being held against her will. Josephine Fairchild, missing for 30 years. As Reed spoke to the dispatcher, Josephine reached out tentatively to touch Abigail's face. Your eyes, she murmured. They're like mine. And this, her fingers brushed the crescent-shaped birthmark on Abigail's wrist. I have the same mark. She pushed up her sleeve to reveal an identical birthmark, faded with age. My baby had this mark. They told me my baby died, but I never believed them. I never stopped looking for you in my dreams. Abigail couldn't stop her tears. I'm here now, and we're going to take you home. You fools, Lorraine spat, backing toward the door. You have no idea what you're doing. Josephine isn't capable of returning to normal life. The doctors at St. Catherine said the damage was permanent. The medication is the only thing that keeps her from complete psychosis. The doctors you paid to keep her drugged and imprisoned, Reed challenged. Yes, I'm sure they were completely ethical in their assessment. Lorraine's hand found the doorknob. This isn't over. When the authorities see her condition, they'll understand I was acting in everyone's best interest. Everyone's best interest. Abigail stood, anger replacing her tears. You destroyed her life. You stole my mother from me, my father from her, all to protect your precious reputation and access to the family money. You know nothing about my motives, Lorraine hissed. Nothing. Before Reed could stop her, she twisted the knob and flung the door open, only to find James Fairchild standing in the doorway, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. I know everything, Lorraine, he said, his voice deathly quiet. I heard every word. Lorraine stumbled back. James, how did you— I followed you, he replied, stepping into the room. After you stormed out of the estate, I knew you were hiding something crucial. I never imagined— His voice broke as his gaze fell on Josephine. My God, Joe! Josephine stared at him, her eyes wide and uncertain. They said you were dead, she whispered. James moved toward her slowly, as if afraid she might vanish. No, my love, I'm very much alive, and I've been looking for you for 30 years. Lorraine backed against the wall, her face contorted with a mixture of rage and fear. You don't understand what she was doing to you, to our family. She was turning you against me, questioning the foundation's finances. Because you were embezzling, James finished, his voice hard. I know that too. Reed found the old financial records. You've been stealing from our family's charity for decades. I was protecting our legacy, Lorraine shouted. That woman was beneath you, James. She never understood our position, our responsibilities. She would have ruined everything with her middle-class morality and her precious transparency. James ignored her, kneeling before Josephine. Joe, he said tenderly, taking her frail hands in his. Can you ever forgive me for not finding you sooner, for believing the lies? Josephine looked at him with growing recognition. James, she said, reaching out to touch his face with wonder. They told me you didn't want me anymore, that you knew about the baby and didn't want us. Never, he vowed fiercely. I would have moved heaven and earth to find you both, if I'd known. As they embraced, Abigail stepped back, overwhelmed by the moment. Reed moved beside her, keeping his gun trained on Lorraine, who stood frozen in evident shock at seeing her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. It's over, Lorraine, James said without looking at his sister. The police are on their way. You'll answer for everything you've done. You'll never prove anything, Lorraine said, desperation entering her voice. It's my word against a mentally unstable woman who's been delusional for decades. Who do you think they'll believe? They'll believe the evidence, Reed interjected. Saint, Catherine's records, the property deed, the medications, Josephine's diary, Martha's testimony. It's more than enough. The sound of approaching sirens filtered through the cottage windows. James helped Josephine to her feet, supporting her fragile form. We're going home, Joe, he said softly. You, me, and our daughter. We're finally going to be the family we were meant to be. Josephine looked uncertainly at Abigail. Our daughter, she repeated, a glimmer of her former self shining through the damage. Abigail. The name on her lips seemed to unlock something. She straightened slightly, her eyes clearing. I named you Abigail, she said with sudden certainty. After my grandmother, I sang to you before you were born. What did you sing? Abigail asked, her heart pounding. Josephine hummed a few notes, a gentle lullaby, the same melody that had haunted Abigail's dreams throughout her childhood. I know that song, Abigail whispered. I've always known it. Outside, car doors slammed as the police arrived. Reed moved to the cottage door, gun still trained on Lorraine. It's going to be a long night of statements and questions, he told James. But by morning, Josephine and Abigail should be legally free of Lorraine's influence forever. As the police entered, Lorraine's face hardened into a mask of cold defiance. You'll regret this, James, she said quietly. All of you will. But James wasn't listening. He was focused entirely on the miracle before him. His wife and daughter, together at last, after 30 years of emptiness, his family had been restored. And as the authorities led Lorraine away, Abigail stood with her newfound parents, sensing that while one chapter of their story was ending, another, perhaps even more challenging, was just beginning. 3 days after Josephine's discovery, Fairchild Estate buzzed with a nervous energy it hadn't known in decades. Martha had transformed the East Wing into a comfortable sanctuary for Josephine, who had been released into James's care following a brief hospital evaluation. The doctors had been cautiously optimistic, noting that while the years of medication had taken their toll, Josephine's cognitive functions showed surprising resilience now that the drugs were leaving her system. Abigail stood in the doorway of what had once been Josephine's music room, watching as James carefully removed the dust cover from the grand piano. Sunlight streamed through freshly washed windows, illuminating the space that had been shrouded in darkness for so long. Do you think she'll want to play again? Abigail asked softly. James ran his hand reverently over the polished surface. I don't know. The doctors said we shouldn't expect too much too quickly. 30 years of psychological manipulation and medication. He shook his head. We need to be patient. I understand, Abigail said, though part of her ached with impatience. She'd found her mother, the woman she'd wondered about her entire life, but Josephine remained largely a mystery, trapped behind walls of confusion and fragmented memories. A soft sound behind them drew their attention. Josephine stood in the hallway, leaning on Martha's arm. She wore a simple blue dress that hung loosely on her thin frame. Her silver-streaked hair gathered in a neat bun. Her eyes, though still clouded with uncertainty, held more awareness than they had at the cottage. "James," she called hesitantly. "Abigail, we're here, Joe," James said gently, crossing to her side. "Martha's been showing you around?" Josephine nodded. Some things are familiar, like déjà vu." Her gaze drifted to the piano, and a small gasp escaped her. "My piano," she whispered. "Would you like to sit down?" James asked, guiding her to the bench. Josephine settled before the instrument, her fingers hovering just above the keys. For a long moment, she didn't move, her expression a mixture of longing and fear. "I used to play," she said, more statement than question. "For hours. You were wonderful," James confirmed. "Music was your life before we lost you." Slowly, tentatively, Josephine lowered her hands to the keys. The first notes were hesitant, disjointed. She frowned in concentration, pressing harder, as if trying to force the music through the fog in her mind. "I can't," she said finally, her voice breaking. "It's gone. It's all right," James assured her, his hand gentle on her shoulder. "It'll come back in time." Abigail stepped forward, drawn by her mother's distress. "May I?" she asked, gesturing to the space beside Josephine on the bench. Josephine nodded, shifting slightly. Abigail sat down and placed her hands on the keys. Taking a deep breath, she began to play Summer Whispers, the melody that had come to her so inexplicably during her brief employment at the estate. As the familiar notes filled the room, Josephine's eyes widened. Her right hand moved to join Abigail's, hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence, adding harmonies and embellishments that transformed the simple melody into something richer, more complex. "I wrote this," Josephine said, a smile breaking across her face. "For your anniversary, our 10th, James confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. For several minutes, mother and daughter played together, the music creating a bridge across the decades of separation. When the final notes faded, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. The moment was shattered by the shrill ring of a phone. Samuel Reed, who had been standing quietly in the corner, checked his cell. "It's the district attorney," he said, stepping into the hallway to take the call. James and Abigail exchanged a look. Lorraine's arrest had set in motion a complex legal process. She faced multiple charges: kidnapping, false imprisonment, attempted murder, fraud, and embezzlement. Yet despite the overwhelming evidence, she had maintained her innocence, insisting that she had only been caring for a mentally ill sister-in-law who had attempted suicide 30 years earlier. When Reed returned, his expression was grim. "Lorraine's been granted bail," he announced. "Her lawyers argued successfully that she's not a flight risk given her standing in the community." "She's free?" James asked incredulously. "Under house arrest at her downtown apartment with an ankle monitor," Reed clarified. "The DA is concerned about some developments in the case. Apparently, Lorraine has produced documentation from St. Catherine's claiming Josephine was voluntarily admitted for psychological treatment following a suicide attempt in 1994. "That's absurd," James protested. "Joe would never—" "I know," Reed interrupted, "but the documents look legitimate, and they have Josephine's signature, forged." "Obviously," Abigail said. "Almost certainly, but it complicates things." Reed hesitated. "There's more. The St. Catherine's facility where Josephine was initially held. There was a fire last night. Most of the archived records were destroyed." A chill ran through the room. Josephine clutched James's hand. Her earlier moment of clarity now clouded with fear. "She's destroying evidence," James said flatly. "The police are investigating, but it will be difficult to prove arson, let alone connect it to Lorraine." Reed sighed. "The case isn't as straightforward as we'd hoped. It's essentially Josephine's testimony against Lorraine's at this point." All eyes turned to Josephine, who shrank under their gaze. I don't remember everything," she said anxiously. "It's all in pieces." "It's all right, Joe," James soothed. "No one expects you to remember everything right away." Reed's phone rang again. This time, his face paled as he listened. "When?" he demanded. "How is that possible?" After a moment, He ended the call and turned to the others. "Lorraine's gone," he announced. Somehow she disabled her ankle monitor and slipped past the officer stationed outside her apartment. "The police are searching for her now." "Oh, God," Abigail breathed. "She could be anywhere." "Not anywhere," James said grimly. "She'll come here. She still believes she can control this situation." Reed moved to the window, scanning the grounds. "I'm calling for additional security. In the meantime, we need to move Josephine somewhere safer." "No," Josephine said suddenly, her voice stronger than it had been since her rescue. "I'm tired of running, of hiding. This is my home." James looked at her with concern. "Joe, if Lorraine comes here, let her come," Josephine interrupted, a flash of her former spirit showing through. "I want to face her. After 30 years, I deserve that much." Before anyone could respond, Martha burst into the room, her face ashen. "Mr. James," she gasped, "Miss Lorraine is here, and she has a gun." The next few moments unfolded in a blur of motion. Reed drew his own weapon, directing Martha to call the police. James moved protectively in front of Josephine, while Abigail froze in shock. "Where is she?" Reed demanded. "Coming up the main staircase," Martha replied, her voice trembling. Reed turned to James. "Get Josephine and Abigail out through the service stairs. I'll handle Lorraine." "No," Josephine said firmly, rising from the piano bench. "I told you, I'm done running. This isn't the time for bravery." "Joe," James pleaded. "She's armed and desperate, and I'm finally remembering who I am," Josephine replied. "Who I was before she broke me." The sound of footsteps in the hallway silenced their argument. Reed positioned himself by the door, gun raised. James made one last attempt to shield Josephine, but she gently pushed him aside, standing tall despite her frailty. When Lorraine appeared in the doorway, the sight was shocking. Gone was the impeccably groomed society matron. This woman was wild-eyed, her silver hair disheveled, her expensive clothing rumpled, and in her hand, pointed straight at Josephine, was a small revolver. "Hello, sister dear," Lorraine said, her voice unnaturally calm despite her appearance. "How lovely to see the family reunited at last." "Put the gun down, Lorraine," Reed ordered, his own weapon trained on her. Lorraine ignored him, her focus entirely on Josephine. "Do they know the truth yet? Have you told them why I had to protect James from you?" "There is no truth in anything you say," James said coldly. "It's over, Lorraine. The police are on their way." A strange smile twisted Lorraine's lips. "Always so naive, brother. Always seeing the best in people, even when they don't deserve it." She took a step closer, the gun unwavering. "Did your precious Josephine tell you she was planning to leave you? That she was going to take your unborn child and disappear?" "That's a lie," James snapped. "Is it?" Lorraine's gaze locked with Josephine's. "Tell him, Joe. Tell him about the plane ticket I found. One way to Europe." A flicker of confusion crossed Josephine's face. I don't remember any ticket." "Of course you don't," Lorraine said with mock sympathy. "How convenient, your memory only returns for the parts that paint me as the villain." Abigail watched the exchange with growing dread. Lorraine was unraveling before their eyes, but her finger remained steady on the trigger. The gun pointed at her mother's heart. "Even if what you say is true," Abigail said carefully, "nothing justifies what you did. You stole 30 years from them, from all of us." Lorraine's gaze shifted to Abigail, a flash of hatred in her eyes. "You should never have come here. Everything was fine until you appeared with that damned ring. Put the gun down." "Lorraine," Reed repeated, inching closer. "Don't make this worse than it already is." Sirens wailed in the distance, signaling the approach of police. Lorraine's expression hardened with resolve. "It ends today," she said quietly. "All of it." The gun shifted, aiming now at James. Before anyone could react, Josephine lunged forward with unexpected strength, crying out, "No!" The sound of the gunshot was deafening in the confined space. Time seemed to stand still in the moment after the gunshot. Josephine had thrown herself toward James, her fragile body moving with a strength born of desperation, as the sound reverberated through the room. Abigail screamed. Reed lunged forward and Lorraine staggered back, a look of shock on her face. But it was the curtains behind Lorraine that burst into flames, not any person in the room. In her agitation, Lorraine's aim had gone wide, the bullet striking an antique oil lamp that exploded on impact. The distraction gave Reed the opportunity he needed. He tackled Lorraine to the ground, wrestling the gun from her hand as flames began to lick up the heavy drapes. "Get them out of here," he shouted to Abigail, pinning a struggling Lorraine beneath him. The fire spread with alarming speed, feeding on the decades-old textiles and wood. Martha appeared in the doorway, coughing as smoke began to fill the corridor. "The back stairs are already blocked," she gasped. "The fire's spreading through the east wing." Abigail grabbed her mother's arm, helping James support her as they moved toward the main hallway. Behind them, Reed hauled Lorraine to her feet, keeping a firm grip on her, despite her continued struggles. "You don't understand," Lorraine was saying, her voice high and desperate. "I did it all for James, for the family name. Save it for the court," Reed growled, pushing her ahead of him as they followed the others. The main staircase was still clear, though smoke was beginning to drift down from the upper floors. As they descended, Lorraine suddenly wrenched free from Reed's grasp. Instead of running down and out to safety, she turned and bolted back up the stairs. "Lorraine," James called, horrified. "What are you doing?" "The evidence," she cried over her shoulder. "I have to destroy it all." Reed hesitated, torn between pursuing Lorraine and ensuring everyone else's safety. "Get outside," he ordered James and the others. "The police and fire department are almost here." "Mr. Reed," Martha said urgently, pointing upward. "The ceiling beams in this section are over 100 years old. If the fire reaches them..." As if summoned by her warning, a terrible creaking sound came from above. Josephine clutched James's arm in terror. "Lorraine," James called again. "Come back." But his sister had disappeared into the smoke-filled upper hallway. Reed made a split-second decision, racing back up the stairs after her. "Samuel, no!" Abigail cried. But it was too late. A uniformed police officer burst through the front door, followed by 2 firefighters. "Everyone out now," the officer commanded, ushering them toward the exit. As they stumbled into the fresh air outside, Abigail looked back at the grand old house. Flames were visible in multiple windows now, and black smoke billowed from the roof. Emergency vehicles lined the driveway, their lights flashing in the late afternoon sun. "Reed and Lorraine are still in there," she told a firefighter frantically. "We'll find them, ma'am," he assured her, though his expression betrayed his doubt. "Please stay back." James had eased Josephine onto a garden bench a safe distance from the burning mansion. Martha sat beside her, holding her hand and murmuring words of comfort. Abigail joined them, her heart racing as she watched more firefighters enter the building. "She never could let go," James said quietly, his eyes fixed on the estate. Even as a child, Lorraine held on to things, grudges, possessions, control, with such ferocity. "Why did she go back in?" Abigail asked. James shook his head. "I don't know. Perhaps there's something in the house that could further incriminate her. Or perhaps..." He couldn't finish the thought. Minutes stretched into an eternity as they watched the firefighters battle the blaze. The east wing, where the fire had started, was now fully engulfed. The central portion of the house was beginning to succumb as well, despite the firefighters' best efforts. Suddenly, there was a commotion at the front entrance. Reed emerged, supported by 2 firefighters, his face blackened with soot, coughing violently. Abigail rushed forward. "Samuel, are you all right? Where's Lorraine?" The paramedics converged on Reed, placing an oxygen mask over his face. He pushed it away briefly. "She wouldn't come," he rasped. "Locked herself in the study. I tried to break down the door, but the ceiling started to collapse." He coughed again, deep and painful. "I'm sorry, James. I couldn't reach her." A tremendous crash silenced further conversation as the central portion of the roof caved in, sending a column of sparks and smoke into the darkening sky. The firefighters retreated, switching tactics from rescue to containment. James stood motionless, watching as the home where generations of Fairchilds had lived and died was consumed by flames. His expression was unreadable, grief for his sister warring with relief that his wife and daughter were safe. Josephine rose from the bench, moving to stand beside him. "She chose this," she said softly, taking his hand. In the end, Lorraine chose her secrets over her life. As the evening deepened, the fire slowly came under control. Though the mansion was clearly a total loss, the firefighters confirmed what they already knew. There was no hope of finding Lorraine alive. In the days that followed, as they settled into a suite at Savannah's finest hotel, the full story began to emerge. In Lorraine's downtown apartment, investigators found a hidden safe containing decades of damning evidence, financial records documenting her embezzlement from the family foundation, correspondence with St. Catherine's administrators regarding Josephine's involuntary confinement, and most damning of all, a journal in which Lorraine had meticulously documented her plan to eliminate Josephine and take control of the Fairchild fortune. She was beyond delusional, Reed told them. Still recovering from smoke inhalation, but well enough to visit, she genuinely believed she was protecting James from a gold-digging wife who would ruin the family name. And the fire at the estate? Abigail asked. Did she set it deliberately? Reed nodded grimly. The forensic team found evidence of accelerants in multiple locations. She must have planted them earlier, planning to destroy the house and everyone in it if her confrontation didn't go as planned. James shook his head in sorrow. I never saw the darkness in her, all these years. Living with a sister capable of such calculated evil. Don't blame yourself, Josephine said. Reaching for his hand, though still frail, she grew stronger each day as the drugs left her system, and her mind continued to clear. Lorraine was very good at hiding her true nature. 3 weeks after the fire, they stood together on the grounds of what had once been Fairchild Estate. The mansion was gone. Reduced to a blackened foundation and a few skeletal chimneys, yellow police tape still cordoned off portions of the site where investigators continued to work. What will you do with the property? Abigail asked, surveying the devastation. James looked at Josephine, who had insisted on coming despite her doctor's concerns about the emotional impact. What do you think, Joe? It's as much your decision as mine. Josephine stared at the ruins for a long moment. I spent 30 years as a prisoner, she said finally. First in that clinic, then in the cottage. I don't want to build another prison, even a gilded one. She turned to Abigail. What would you like to see here? Abigail was taken aback. Me? You're a Fairchild, James said gently. This is your legacy, too. Abigail looked around the expansive grounds, at the ancient oak trees that had survived the fire, the distant magnolias that still bloomed despite the tragedy. An idea took shape in her mind. A place of healing, she said slowly. A sanctuary for women who've been victims of abuse, manipulation, injustice, women who need to rebuild their lives, like Mother has had to do. Josephine's eyes filled with tears. Yes, she whispered. That's perfect. The Josephine Fairchild Foundation, James said, nodding with approval. We can use what's left of the family fortune, what Lorraine didn't steal, to fund it. As they began to walk away from the ruins, Josephine suddenly stopped, turning back toward a patch of ground near what had been the east wing. The piano, she said. Is it completely destroyed? James nodded sadly. Everything in that section of the house is gone, Joe. Josephine was quiet for a moment. Then we'll get a new one, she said with unexpected firmness. For the foundation, music helped me remember who I was, even when everything else was taken from me. It can help others heal too. Back at the hotel, as evening fell, James found Abigail alone on the terrace, gazing out at the lights of Savannah. I have something for you, he said, holding out a small velvet box. Inside was the gold ring with its worn inscription, "For always, my love." It was found in the garden where Lorraine dropped it, James explained. The only thing to survive the fire, apart from us. Abigail brushed away tears. Thank you. James sat beside her. Eleanor Foster raised a remarkable woman, he said. I wish I could thank her. So do I, Abigail admitted. I miss her every day. We've all lost so much, James said softly. But somehow, against all odds, we found each other again. From inside the suite came the sound of Josephine humming, a gentle, hesitant melody that grew stronger as she continued. The same lullaby she had sung to her unborn child 30 years before. She's remembering more each day, James said, hope warming his voice. The doctors are amazed at her progress. Abigail smiled, closing her hand around the ring. Life has a strange way of coming full circle, doesn't it? What began with an accusation of theft ends with a family restored. As they sat together in comfortable silence, Abigail felt a sense of peace settling over her. The journey ahead would not be easy. There were still wounds to heal, memories to recover, relationships to build, but for the first time in her life, she felt complete, as if the missing pieces of her heart had finally been found. And in the quiet evening, as the lights of Savannah twinkled below, the Fairchild family, broken and mended, lost and found, began to write a new chapter in their extraordinary story